Hey everybody, my name is Ian O'Byrne. I'm the Multi-Literacies Department Editor for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. Basically what we've been doing is putting together a series of columns for the journal. Along with the columns, we have some supplemental materials. So we've been reaching out to experts in the field to provide some depth and some complexity to the points that we make in the column. And so right now I'm really excited to talk to Whitney because we had a little bit of a chat the other day to unpack some of these issues, and already my mind's blown a little bit. So Whitney, you want to introduce yourself? Tell us where you come from.
Sure. Well, I hail from just north of Dallas, Texas, where I'm a PhD candidate at the University of North Texas in learning technologies, and have been working in the field of online education and blended education for about 10 years, mostly focused in higher ed, but my roots are K-12. So I got started the way a lot of us do, in the classroom, face-to-face teaching day after day.
Very cool. So once again, this column is on hybrid and blended learning. One of the things that we often see is that when we bring, we start off the school year, teachers in secondary or instructors in higher ed, we get this impetus that, either we see other people teaching in blended spaces, or the administration comes down and says you need to incorporate this in. And when we start to have dialogue or people go online to Google it, they are very confused about what this means. So what does it mean to have a blended learning space or hybrid learning? So, because you have a wealth of expertise with it, what does hybrid or blended learning mean to you?
It's a good question. I think it truly means different things to different people. It's one of those areas that we're still defining as a group, and the more people are trying new things and innovating, and others are trying to emulate those practices, we're seeing a lot of innovation in the space that's continuing to evolve it. I think there's been kind of a bit of a pendulum swing from the higher ed side of things, specifically, where we've seen the move from fully face-to-face to completely online for full degree programs. And that shift all by itself has kind of had some push down into the K-12 space to say we've got to be preparing students for this digital future, because there are students that will never step foot on campus and will be able to continue their degrees or continue their education and earn their degrees online. So how do we prepare our K-12 students as they're finishing their K-12 experience to be able to be that type of self-regulated learner that can also be digitally engaged? And I don't know that anyone has a magic recipe or a secret sauce that absolutely positively works yet. I think we're all learning from each other and with each other in really deeply meaningful ways. I'm interested in seeing some of the newer models. I'll be exploring one in a middle school in my area very soon that I just heard about. I'm dying to see what they're doing there, where 50% of the day is more the students engaged around in an open space with their devices. And so it truly is a bit of a blended model. There's not very much direct instruction at all. But I've seen classrooms, a particular fourth grade classroom, where there were couches and comfortable spaces, and the students were more self-directed and using technology to capture their findings and their research and their Genius Hour projects, and using Google Drive as their hub or their community to be able to put those things into a space together. So in the K-12 space, I think there's still a lot of room to create these blended hybrid spaces. I think eventually we're going to see full-blown buildings that become just the community where the students come together, but their experiences are all very digital and personalized, and their journeys become then adaptive rather than the technology always having to drive adaptive learning. I love that quote.
And so the challenge is, throughout the other interviews we've heard again and again, it means different things to different people. It's always evolving. We have all these buzzwords that those of us that are on the bleeding edge always use. We say that, shift happens, and my advisor would say literacy is deixis, which it's always changing. So in this environment where everything is always changing, you mentioned before that it appears like there's this pendulum swing. I mean, historically, what's happening? What's happening in K-12? What's happening in higher ed? Like, who's getting it right from your perspective? You know, I mean, so if, as we're trying to figure out hybrid or blended learning, what have we seen and done so far, you know, in these different spaces?
Well, I think if we just take the pendulum model as the example and say fully face-to-face experiences aren't preparing anybody for the future, right? If we don't have any digital components in teaching and learning, I think we're preparing students for our past rather than their future. If we go all the way the other direction and things are digital only, I think we're creating a gap where we're making people too reliant on technology, and there is such an important human component to teaching and learning that oftentimes will get dismissed in the online environment, where I've been doing some work and some research around trying to make sure that we're humanizing online and blended learning in a way that's deeply meaningful to the student, so that we're still letting them know we care about them, that there is someone on the other end of the technology that's engaged with them and cares about their learning journey or their pathway to success. And so I think the pendulum is going to end up kind of settling out in the middle. and what we're going to see is more and more blended experiences where the humans have to come together and have conversations around what they're learning in order to be able to synthesize information. In some of the articles I've read, social learning is really about a conversation. And there are some that believe that learning only occurs through conversations. So if that's the case and we're fully digital, is a text-only environment conducive to learning? So I think that pendulum is starting to settle out in the middle. As far as best practices, what's working right now, there is a really wonderful new blended MBA program at St. Ed's University in Austin, Texas, where they are meeting 3 times during a 7-week period to make sure that the experience is still very, very high touch. And in a space where MBA programs have gone fully online for probably 7 to 10 years now, we've seen just an absolute gluttony of them in the market. I mean, you can get an MBA anywhere online. This new approach to really kind of bring it back to its roots. If you think of an MBA program really being about making connections with others, it makes sense to bring people together in that way. So I do think we're going to see kind of a leveling of that, and perhaps it will have impacts back to K-12, where there stops being this push for fully digital and fully online K-12 environments, which we've seen as well. So I do hope that we get some settling, some balance in that space. But I think that it's still important to have those cutting edge, bleeding edge, leading edge people that you mentioned earlier, who are always looking for new ways to innovate and do things differently, because without them, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's a challenge, you know, with Catherine Kennedy, we talked about the challenges if we say, okay, this is what hybrid or blended learning looks like. You know, here's the definition, here's the 5 bullet points, here's the model. You know, it's like when I was teaching 8th grade, I'm going to see 100 different versions of the same model. But, you know, when we keep it wide open and you can just do pretty much anything that you want, you can mess with the model, you can remix it, you can iterate to suit what you need. You brought up the difference between like K-12 and higher ed, and you know, best practices and what works and what doesn't work. Given you gave some examples, what is some of the best that you've seen? You know, what's working right now in K-12 or higher ed? Do you see any differences? Do you see one working better than another? What do you see in terms of best practices across those 2 spaces?
Again, your questions are hard and exciting to try to synthesize the information in my head on the fly like this. This is exciting. But I think that we often teach the way we learn. And so the transition in higher ed to more online experiences has created opportunities for people who are going through teacher education programs to have online experiences so that they can truly blend their own classrooms in a meaningful way. You learn just as much from having a bad online learning experience as you do from having a really good one. I would argue that maybe you even learn more when you have a bad online learning experience because you know what not to do. And I think there's genuinely been both bad and good learning experiences happening for teachers who have explored those opportunities for themselves. So, you know, I think with that, we're probably seeing the best of the best now from that learning that has occurred. And I think the other thing that we have to look at is providing professional development to educators in a blended learning model. So when we think about what happens when an educator goes off to training, right? So we have these great ed camps, so I don't want to discount that. That tends to be very face-to-face. But when they go to a training, say at a regional service center, so the educational entity in your area might serve up training for teachers, we often do it in a stand and deliver format. The same format we don't want replicated in the classroom. But there's a service center here in Texas, Region 11 in Fort Worth, that is starting to create their math academies as a blended learning experience so that teachers, even though it's not about blended learning, are having a blended learning experience in these digital math academies. So they may come face-to-face for 4 days, but they're getting 40 hours, 38 to 40 hours worth of credit because a lot of what's happening is happening online. And they're doing that through both kind of a blended and a flip approach where they're consuming content before they come to class so the class is more meaningful and relevant, but then also to allow them to reflect and share lessons and best practices with each other. And we're actually now in that approach being able to collect efficacy data. So they're being able to share back what they've implemented in their classroom with their kids, how it worked, did it improve learning outcomes? And so that's the kind of data that in the past, when you did professional development, you weren't able to capture because it was a one-shot deal, right? It was that, let me tell you what I know, and then I'm going to go away, and you're going to go implement this in your classroom. But now with a more blended learning approach, PD could even capture efficacy data. And I think that's a shift that we're going to see that's going to help people really think through blended learning in their own environments.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, you know, when we provide PD, when we have, you know, teacher in service or teacher pre-service, teacher development, you know, it's like, here's the content. Now you're supposed to go run it. We don't give you any follow-up, any support. We don't help you, you know, problem solve or deconstruct issues when they happen. You know, it's almost like, you know, some of the PD I've been involved in where you'd have an initial day or two where you'd have, you know, teachers working together, you'd have keynotes, you have speeches, and then it'd be like, okay, go away for a couple months. Go try it in the classroom. See what works, see what doesn't work. You know, we'll have online spaces for you to decompress and vent and try new things, and we'll have readings and discussion areas to push you, and then bring you back face to face. You know, okay, what did you do? What were you supposed to do over the last couple months? You know, and come back and have that human interaction. So, I mean, if you've seen a lot, one of the things I asked you in our earlier meeting, you know, if you were queen of the universe, you know, and you've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, you know, what does this all look like 5 years from now? You know, when that pendulum is done swinging 5 years from now or 10 years from now, if we were to do this again, what does hybrid learning look like? What does blended learning look like? Or do we care?
Yeah, no, of course we care. We deeply care. We wouldn't be having this conversation. I think, you know, it's funny, the pendulum may not shift back to where it was, but it may shift further forward, and it may actually keep swinging, right? So I think maybe it doesn't ever stop. It just swings further to the direction of forward. And 5 years from now, you know, we're already seeing so many amazing things happening. I mean, think of augmented reality and the power of wearable devices and people being able to quantify their steps or their heart rate and use real human data for some of their math problems or their science problems. And when it becomes, the data becomes very relevant to the student, and it's their information that they're using to do their math problems or their science lessons, it'll change things and make it more meaningful to them. And I think we're going to continue to see the shift where technology more and more will be integral to teaching and learning. And I don't think we'll ever get to a point to where we say, oh no, we can't, that's silly, all that online and all that data, we don't need that. The shift is going to continue happening. 5 years from now, I think, we're going to see more and more touch and things you don't have to touch type devices. The touch technology is so common now that I don't think that that's a shocker, but the fact that you may not have to touch it, that we become more of the connect learning generation, won't be too surprising. I think we're going to get into the quantified self more and more. We're going to move away from devices that are heavy at all. So, I mean, I'm talking to you from my laptop, and I'm already thinking it's a little outdated. I mean, it should be on my iPad with a mobile keyboard. Things are getting smaller, and at the same time, the iPhone's getting bigger. What is that? So,
Yeah.
but you'll be able to beam yourself up from your watch, right? So there's just so many changes in technology. I think we've got to foster the edginess of those folks who are always trying new things, and make sure that we don't stifle creativity in our educators. We talk a lot about creativity in education and stifling creativity in the children in the classroom. We hear Sir Ken Robinson and his talk, and many of you may be thinking of it right now in the RSA Animate sketch. But I would say that we have to make sure that we're empowering educators to stay on that bleeding edge and try new things, because without them, 5 years from now could look very much like now.
Yeah, it's almost, you want to see science fiction become science reality. You read books like Ready Player One, and I'm reading Ready Player One, and I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. This will never ever happen. And then you see the holodeck come out from Microsoft, the HoloLens. You see augmented reality. You see Oculus Rift. You see these new technologies coming out, and it's like, well, we're already there. Like, we have the ability now to plug in, and it makes you wonder if 5-10 years from now, we'll sit at home and you basically plug yourself into a harness, and instead of us video conferencing, this setup that I have in front of me right now will seem a little bit antiquated, where I just plug in and you and I are sitting in a room someplace, and we meet up on this dock someplace to talk and chat and teach classes and stuff like that.
Well, I think we're seeing classrooms that are doing a lot of Skype, mystery Skypes, right, with authors and other things. And luckily in those classrooms, those children are getting prepared for the digital workforce. So I work with a team of learning designers who build online courses for K-12 higher ed and corporate now, and we're a completely remote workforce. So there's no need anymore to drive through traffic, have road rage while you're having your coffee and spill it on yourself. There's no need to end up on the road anymore, because so many of us can do the work that we do digitally and remotely. And I think you're right, there is going to be a shift, not just for kids, but for adults as they get out into work, to know how to use these technologies in order to conduct business. I hope the future children aren't strapped into a harness and plugged into a box. I know that there are a lot of photos or graphic artist designs of people plugged into machines from a long time ago. Those have been floating around, and I really hope that's not the future. When my kids are too plugged into Minecraft and things like that, I'm like, okay, guys, we got to go outside. We got to go play. Exactly. But there is a certain amount of that already occurs. My daughter taught herself how to play the ukulele this summer by watching YouTube videos. So you can learn anything if you just look for it online.
So, so the last question is the what's next part. If I'm an educator, in K-12, I'm a higher ed instructor, and I listen to this and I say, I definitely agree with you. I want to start. And so you're talking before about mindsets and teachers being willing to explore it and play with different things. What's your advice? What's the first starting point that you would give to them?
If you're one of those cool folks that are already doing this kind of stuff, keep doing it, please. We need you. If you're one of those folks that's on the fence and you're thinking, yeah, I might be ready, don't be afraid to push the buttons. I mean, just go for it. Make mistakes. Let the students drive a little bit. sometimes that's the hardest part, is letting go and letting the students kind of take control of the classroom and the learning. And I would say when you're ready to get to that point, they'll take you places you haven't explored yet. And it's going to be probably the most impactful journey you will go on as an educator.
Very cool. And document it all along the way.
That's right.
Share it out, document it.
Please blog it, take pictures, share with the world, get connected with other educators on Twitter who are sharing their ideas all the time, and definitely push the envelope and explore.
Thank you. Whitney, where can people get in touch with you? I know that you're very approachable. Where do you hang out online?
I can be found on Twitter at Whitney Kilgore, not hard to find. I blog at whitneykilgore.com, not very frequently at the moment because I am in the throes of a dissertation, but occasionally I write a little blog post, so you can find me there.
Where are you in the process right now?
I'm doing my interviews. I have one this afternoon, and so IRB is in. Interviews are underway, and then it's the final write-up, and if all goes well, walking in May.
Congrats. What is one of the games that my advisors would play with me is, what's like the elevator pitch or the elevator talk for your research questions? So what are you studying?
I'm taking a look at the design, intent, and pedagogy of the statewide educator Twitter chats as they are posted on the U.S. Department of Education Office of Ed Tech website.
Very cool. Any initial themes or trends that you're finding?
I'm not at the point to be ready to share those just yet, but I have gone through the process of categorizing all the chats and am starting to uncover the design intent now.
Very cool. We'll be looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Ian.
So once again, this interview is a series of supplemental materials to provide some depth to the columns that we have out there. And as Whitney said, this community is very approachable, and they love sharing and they love hearing from new people and new ideas. Very, very welcoming community. So please try these new things out, test out hybrid and blended in your classroom, post about it, blog about it, capture everything that you can, video conference with others, take snapshots, put your work up online, put your ideas online so that you can push the thinking of others. In that same vein, take a look at what we've shared here. Get in touch with Whitney, get in touch with the journal, get in touch with any of the authors and any of the people we've interviewed, and have your own responses and your own posts back to them. So with that, we'll wrap up.